Defending Bidenomics is like trying to sell moldy bread as a gourmet meal, and somehow they expect you to swallow it with a smile. Prices, upper, wages, stagnant. The spin, relentless. Let's rip the lid off this economic fantasy and expose exactly who's cashing in. Because, spoiler, it ain't you.
Secretary, I've watched you for years, even before I came to Washington. And
Excuse me, Bob. It's okay.
when I have time, I do. I enjoy reading your speeches. I think you're what cool looks like. You're a good sport to go out every day and try to defend Bidenomics. It's like trying to defend a fungal infection. Bidenomics is really just paying more to live worse, isn't it?
I certainly wouldn't agree with that characterization. Bidenomics first tried to address the pain that households were experiencing because of the pandemic and to help them survive it. Small businesses, households, people who had lost their jobs, to prevent the kind of scarring we saw after the financial crisis. And as the economy began to recover, and we quickly, of all advanced countries that experienced the pandemic, no country has done better than the United States in quickly having a labor market recovery, resuming growth, and we have the largest real wage increases of any advanced country. And then medium term, Bidenomics is focused on helping middle-class families lead better lives, address the problems that they have, create jobs in areas.
I could interrupt you, Madam Secretary, because I've only got 5 minutes. Good try. These high prices are here to stay, aren't they? Let me amend that, Madam Secretary. These high prices caused by Bidenomics are here to stay, aren't they?
Well, the high prices were not caused by Bidenomics. We suffered a pandemic that resulted in severe dislocations.
Yes, ma'am, but if I could ask you, they're here to stay, aren't they?
I don't expect the level of prices to go down, but the rate of inflation...
So they're here to stay?
Well, some prices will be higher than they were before the pandemic and will stay higher, but wages have risen considerably, and the pace of price increases has now receded. Over the last 6 months, the measure of inflation the Fed focuses on has been running exactly at 2%.
But if your wages...
And wages are going up.
If you don't get a pay raise, you're screwed. I mean, there's a difference between disinflation and deflation. Y'all talk about disinflation, which I'm happy to have. Disinflation means inflation is going down. It means prices are rising less rapidly than they were. But that's a far cry from deflation, which means the level of these high prices caused by Bidenomics are here to stay. Here's what Jay Powell just said on February 4th. He said, he was asked the question, inflation is one thing, prices are another, and I wonder if there's any reason to believe that people will see the prices of things decline. And here's what Chairman Powell said. So the prices of some things will decline, others will go up, but we don't expect to see a decline in the overall price level. That doesn't tend to happen in economies, except in very negative circumstances. He's talking about a recession. It'll take a recession to get these prices down.
Well, we don't have to get the prices down because wages are going up, and a metric that is worth knowing is that the median American house worker
but let me stop
is
you, I'm
able
gonna get cut off.
to buy.
You don't think we need to get these prices down? You think it's okay that bacon's up 20% under President Biden, chicken's up 23.5%, coffee's up 30%, gas is up 44%, new cars and trucks are up 20% because people can't afford that's used cars because people can't afford a new car They're up 24% under Bidenomics. You don't think we need to get these prices?
Wages are also up, and wages are up
They're
more.
not up 24%. They're not up 27%. They're not up 23%. They're not up 31%.
I'm sorry, but what is...
People are really getting good at barely getting by because of Bidenomics.
Look, American households have many pressures on their budgets, and President Biden is devoted to doing what we can as an administration, whether it's health care costs, insulin copays, energy costs, to getting these prices down and to helping American households afford a decent middle-class life. But what is true is that the median worker in the United States, if you compare today with 2019, can buy the same basket of goods with $1,400 left over to save or spend. So Americans, on average, are better off in spite of the fact that the level of prices is higher. Thank you.
Madam Secretary, isn't it a fact that the president's proposed budget for next fiscal year is $500 billion more than this fiscal year?
On the spending side?
Yes. That's what a budget is.
Yeah.
You almost have to admire the audacity, standing before the Senate, armed with charts and jargon, while everyday Americans can't afford groceries, and telling them, with a straight face, they should feel richer. That's exactly what Secretary Yellen did. It wasn't an economic update, it was gaslighting wrapped in economic gobbledygook. Let's be blunt. Bidenomics is not building back better. It's building frustration, one overpriced grocery bill at a time. Gas is up, eggs are up, rent is climbing like it's training for Everest. But according to Yellen, it's all fine because, allegedly, wages are up too. Great. Now explain how a 4% raise covers a 30% hike in gas prices, or why a $14 a month surplus, her own claim, is supposed to be the salvation for struggling families. You can't fill your gas tank with theoretical wage growth. You can't buy dinner with GDP percentages, but you sure can feel the pain when you're choosing between groceries and prescriptions. That's the real economy, not the sanitized version peddled by elites in air-conditioned hearing rooms. And here's the insult that hits hardest. Yellen didn't just deny the pain, she polished it. She framed the economic squeeze as a technical success story, tossing out terms like disinflation and economic resilience, as if struggling families should bake a cake and throw a parade. It's like congratulating someone for running a marathon, while you're the one tightening the shoelaces around their ankles. Worse still, the flat refusal to admit prices aren't coming down. The so-called experts have stopped pretending now. Inflation's cooling, they say. Translation, you'll still pay more for gas, groceries, housing, and medicine. It just won't hurt even more next quarter. A lower rate of suffering isn't relief. It's controlled decay. And let's not forget the cherry on this economic disaster Sunday. Bidenomics was supposed to be the grand rescue plan, the bold new vision for working families. Instead, it's become a masterclass in dodging responsibility and spinning misery as progress. Senators raised the hard numbers, 20%, 30%, 40% price hikes. And what did they get? Not accountability, not solutions. They got a smug TED Talk from a Treasury Secretary so out of touch, she might as well be managing the economy from Mars. Since when did adding $18 trillion in debt get rebranded as fiscal responsibility? Biden's budget flunks basic math, Yellen's spinning numbers like it's amateur night at a comedy club, and somehow they expect you to clap along. This isn't budgeting. It's financial gaslighting. Let's torch the illusion.
It is about $400 billion.
It's about $500 billion more, right?
It's about what?
$500 billion more, right?
About that.
Isn't it a fact that since 2019 until today, I'm not including the extra $500 billion that y'all want to spend. Since 2019 through today, U.S. population has increased 1.8%, and the federal government's budget is up 55%. Isn't that a fact?
Well, we had a pandemic.
Isn't that a fact, though? Are my
I'm
numbers
not,
right?
I don't know those numbers.
You don't know? You never looked at that?
I don't have those numbers in my head. I'm not disputing them.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that the president's proposed budget proposes $4.7 trillion in new taxes?
It does propose significant additional taxes, yes.
4.7 trillion?
Something like that, yes.
Okay. You talked about reducing deficit. Isn't it a fact that under President Biden's proposed budget, that gross debt will rise from $32.7 trillion at the close of this year to $51 trillion by 2033?
I'm sorry, what number did you give me for?
The president's
2033?
proposed budget will increase gross debt from $33 trillion at the close of this year to $51 trillion in 2033. Isn't that correct?
Well, debt held by the public, which is,
No, ma'am, that's gross debt. Isn't that a fact?
that's probably a fact.
So you haven't reduced the deficit, have you?
The deficit, the debt and deficits are reduced by the president's
How
budget.
can you go from $33 trillion
Because-
to $51
because-
trillion and call that a reduction in the deficit?
Because that's a calculation for which you need a baseline, and then you compare the budget and the deficits and debt in the budget with a baseline in which there are none of the changes, either in revenues or in spending, that are
Here's
proposed
my
in the
baseline.
budget.
Here's my baseline. At the end of this year, we project people a lot smarter than me, probably not than you, but smarter than me, say that gross debt's $33 trillion. They say if the president's budget is implemented by 2033, it'll be $51 trillion. Isn't that a fact?
If the president's budget is not implemented and none of the changes are made, it will be worse than that. And so the president's budget has improved the fiscal outlook relative to what we would have without the president's proposals.
Even though it raises gross debt from $33 trillion to $51 trillion, you say that's an improvement.
It is an improvement because it raises taxes by more, and it leads to.
That includes taxes. In what world is that an improvement, other than Washington and La La Land?
It's an improvement in that the revenue increases far exceed proposed investments.
Okay. All right, let me ask you this. Isn't it a fact that in January of 2019, the Federal Reserve issued a warning to Silicon Valley Bank over its risk management systems?
I have no idea. I'm not responsible in any way.
But you're in charge of the
supervision.
banking bailouts and the crisis, right?
I am not involved in banking supervision, and I don't have access to any information about the supervision of Silicon Valley Bank.
Okay, so you don't know whether or not the Fed, you haven't looked to see whether or not the Fed issued a warning, 4 years ago to the bank over its risk management systems?
That's not public information, and it's not
Sure it is. It's in
information.
the Wall Street Journal.
Well, it may be in the Wall Street Journal, but it's not public information, and it's not information that I have access to.
Well, I'll give you a copy of this article.
I've read the article, but
The Fed issued a matter requiring attention, and it said your risk management practices are terrible, and you need to improve them.
that is what the article says.
Right. Isn't it a fact that months before SVB went under, that The bank disclosed that its mark-to-market value of its bonds was $16 billion less than their balance sheet value.
They did make such a statement.
Did the people at the Federal Reserve just not read it?
I'm not at the Federal Reserve.
I know.
I was at the Federal Reserve.
But you're at the Treasury, and you're in charge of the banking crisis. Let me ask you.
I am not in charge of the supervision of the bank.
Let me ask you this. Senator Hunter talked about the 2018 amendments to the Dodd-Frank Act. Isn't it a fact? Now, SVB was not stress tested in 2022. 34 banks were. Here's the Fed's report. Isn't it a fact that if SVB had been stress tested, it would have passed?
Stress tests look at capital of a bank.
Here's the yes, ma'am. Under the stress test, isn't it a fact that SVB would have passed?
I don't know. It wasn't stress tested.
You need to look into that, Madam Secretary.
This is not my job. This is the Federal Reserve's job.
Okay, isn't it a fact that when the Federal Reserve stress tested in 2022, it only stress tested credit risk, it didn't stress test duration risk? Isn't that a fact?
I believe the stress tests in general partially address and take account of interest rate
No,
risk.
ma'am. I've read it. Here it is, bigger than Dallas.
Well, to the extent that there are assets held in an available for sale portfolio that would suffer losses due to changing interest rates, that would be captured in the bank's
No, ma'am,
capital.
it's not there. I've read it.
Janet Yellen didn't walk into that hearing. She wandered into a fiscal firing squad with a blindfold on and a stack of excuses. This wasn't policy debate. It wasn't economic nuance. It was a reality check. And the Biden administration failed it in spectacular spreadsheet-shredding fashion. Let's talk numbers, because Yellen sure didn't want to. The national debt on track to explode from $33 trillion to $51 trillion. A federal budget jacked up by 55% since 2019. And when the senator asked for a simple, unvarnished confirmation of those numbers, suddenly the Treasury Secretary turned into a human magic 8-ball. Answers uncertain, reply hazy, try again later, and yet somehow she managed to defend it. In classic Washington acrobatics, we were told borrowing trillions more is actually a win for deficit reduction, because you see, without the president's policies, things could have been worse. That's not economic stewardship. That's the fiscal equivalent of a house fire, where the firefighters show up late, pour gasoline on the blaze, and declare victory because the garage didn't explode. But the fiscal delusion didn't stop there. The Silicon Valley bank debacle, a perfect storm of regulatory negligence and interest rate risk hiding in plain sight. And Yellen's position, not her job. Supervision, not her job. Stress tests, not her job. Apparently, overseeing the financial stability of the nation's banking system is now a choose-your-own-adventure book, and she skipped that chapter entirely. Here's the infuriating part. The red flags were everywhere. Fed warnings dating back to 2019, public reporting, industry experts shouting from the rooftops. But the same administration, eager to shovel trillions into spending packages, conveniently missed the warning signs, lighting up like a Wall Street Christmas tree. Meanwhile, Bidenomics marches on, with shiny slogans about middle-class growth and resilience, masking $4.7 trillion in new taxes, and a national tab ballooning by the hour. The grocery bill doesn't lie. Gas, up 44%. Chicken, up 23%. Bacon, up 20%. And yet, the administration keeps dangling wage growth like it's a get-out-of-inflation-free card. Problem is, paychecks aren't keeping pace, not even close. At the end of the day, this wasn't just a grilling of Yellen. It was a slow public dissection of an economic fantasy wrapped in political spin. And no amount of deflection, abstraction, or bureaucratic charm can hide the simple truth. Washington's spending binge is real, the debt bomb is ticking, and the American people are holding the receipt. Let's be real. If Bidenomics worked the way they claim, your rent wouldn't feel like a second mortgage and your groceries wouldn't need a payment plan. But hey, DC says the economy's strong, so I guess we should all just ignore the receipts in our wallets, right? Wrong. At Malcolm Veyron Talks, we don't swallow spin, we shred it. Because when they peddle slogans while the debt explodes and working families drown, that's not policy. That's malpractice. So if you're done with magical math and economic fairy tales, smash that like button. Sound off in the comments. Has your wallet felt this so-called recovery? And subscribe, because we've got more receipts, more takedowns, and a lot more inconvenient truth coming your way. The gaslighting ends where this channel begins. Stick around. They're not ready for how loud we're getting.